And it's a pleasure to host today's live economic forecast and trends discussion. We are about 9 months into various states of pandemic shutdowns, about a month into the new year, and only 1 week into a brand new administration. As we know, all businesses have been impacted by COVID in some way. Where some struggle, others have found opportunities. Where some industries have remained open, others have had to close. That said, commonalities between them still exist. It's the spirit of business that continues to thrive here in Greater Los Angeles. At the Business Journal, we have the privilege of learning about you and then writing your stories of success and the people behind it who ultimately drive that spirit. In reviewing the makeup of today's registrants for this virtual event, I can share it. You're representing just about all industries and all job functions, but you each share an interest to learn from some of our region's most knowledgeable experts. So here's how the next 90 minutes is going to break down. We're going to be hosting 2 panels, 40 minutes or so each. The first is going to focus on what to expect in 2021. The second will highlight what's new in 2021. In just a moment, I'm going to introduce our first panel and we're going to get things started. I want to thank those of you who have submitted questions when you registered. It's always really helpful for us to get an idea of what our readers want to hear about. So we've gone ahead and incorporated many of your questions into today's Q&A. Also, we're going to be conducting live poll questions throughout each panel. So when you see the question pop up on your screen, we'd love for you to participate and share your opinions. We'll then publish the response to all of our poll questions online and in next week's edition of the Business Journal. Before we get started, I want to thank our sponsors for their investment of time, resources, and the knowledge that contributes to today's discussions. We can't do it without you. Many thanks to CBRE, Colliers International, Connor Group, DPI Retail, KPMG, Positive Results Center, and USC Viterbi School of Engineering. Thank you all so much for being a part of today's program. All right, well, we're going to hop right into things. It is now my pleasure to introduce our first panel. Please welcome Issai, President, Adventist Health Glendale, Laurie Lustig-Bower, Executive Vice President, CBRE, L. Warner, Executive Vice President, Capital Markets, Retail with Colliers International, Yannis Yortsos, Dean, USC Viterbi School of Engineering, and many thanks to our moderator today, Jim Kruse, Chief Executive Officer with DPI Retail. Jim, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to our entire panel. Jim, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Am I unmuted? How's that for a lead-in? Josh, thank you very much. And let me say to everybody, thank you for joining us. If there were better panelists out there that we could have gotten for this particular program, we would have gotten them. I think that we've got the perfect panel for what the circumstances are today. And I want to say one other thing before we jump into real estate. I had the experience just this past Monday of going and getting my vaccination, something that I was very leery of, but I got to tell you, and I'm going to give credit to Yannis's colleague at USC, Dr. David Agus, who is absolutely a gift. I heard an interview with him, and he answered unbelievably deep questions about the vaccine, put my mind completely at rest. And then I wanted to share with Elise, I went to the Kedron Health Center in South Central LA, and I couldn't believe how positive the experience was. The lines were monitored in a very organized fashion. The administrators of the vaccine were gentle, thank goodness. And I was out of there, and I'm delighted that I did it. And I would encourage all of you, I don't know what you've listened to in the media, but the vaccine is what's going to elevate us out of the circumstances that we're currently in. Get the vaccine, check with your doctor, go get the vaccine. So enough for my paid political announcement. And go look up this David Agus online. This guy is a gift. Anyway, so we're getting right into real estate here for 2021. And So let me go with Laurie first. COVID has changed the way, and Yannis and Elise, you can chime in too. COVID has changed the way that we've done business, and it's changed the way that we've lived, more importantly. So are there any parts of your business that you think will not come back? I mean, we've had all kinds of governmental intervention. We've had rent payments that don't need to be made. A lot of things that have gone on during this last calendar year that have been hard on everybody. So Laurie, how has that changed the apartment business?
Well, I think two ways, two, I think, substantial ways. One is my understanding from a lot of developers, now they're thinking about how they design apartment buildings. And because they believe that in the future, we are more likely to work at home for some portion of our work lives, whether it's just one day a week, or some people may not go back to the office at all and just work remotely. They're now thinking about designing apartments so that people actually have a workspace, so that a tenant isn't actually sitting in their bedroom trying to conduct a Zoom meeting with their bed in the background, but to have a little nook or an alcove where a little home office could be put into place. So I think that is something that we'll probably see going forward permanently. And then I also think from an industry perspective that Zoom is also here to stay. I think right before the pandemic hit, Zoom was first coming out. My office was just getting it. Most of the brokers didn't even know how to use it. But COVID has sort of propelled us into the future. And I really think that by having the ability to do these video conference calls, it is so much more convenient than driving across town to meet with a client, that I think that this is going to permanently change the way we do business. And consequently, I think we're going to end up seeing each other more, because seeing them on video is, I think, much better than what we were doing before, which was a phone call.
Thank you. So Yannis, let me come back to you. What do you see as the future of science, technology, and engineering in the post-COVID future?
Well, thanks very much, Jim, about all that. I think that I expect actually that science and engineering will continue flourishing as never before. If there is anything that we learned during the pandemic, is that essentially humanity has only prospered and will continue doing so because of scientific and technological advances. The fast discovery of vaccines and what should have been a smooth distribution aside, is an example of an tremendously accelerating innovation that will continue unabated. I am very optimistic about the future of science and engineering. The digital technology in its myriad forms allows us to function so well during the pandemic and to minimize somewhat its impact. I should mention a notable thinker, Steven Pinker, in his recent book, Enlightenment Now, talks about the importance of science, technology, and humanism in making progress. This will continue unabated. I expect that there will be many more laws to be developed in so many different areas. Because if you think about it, Moore's law states that when you consume knowledge, then you increase knowledge. And so this is opposite or antithetical, if you wish, to energy or material. When you consume materials and energy, then you decrease their availability. The opposite is true for knowledge. The more you consume, the more you create. And that's essentially is the essence of innovation. I'm also sure that the pandemic has inspired many young minds to pursue science and technology and engineering professions. And my only concern is that with technology and engineering becoming so powerful, it also has unintended powerful consequences. And the main concern is that it will still remain in the service of humanity at large and to remain human-centric. And that's where the importance of ethics in technology become important, as well as international developments, which should also be fully informed by the fact that science and technology discovery is a human endeavor that transcends all these boundaries. So in summary, I am very, very optimistic about the progress of science and technology in the future.
Thank you, Yannis. So Elise, let me come to you. You oversee and lead various healthcare organizations. How are your organizations going to be assisted by using technology in the future? And what is going to be some of the main changes that technology will bring to a healthcare organization?
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. Can you see me?
Beautifully.
Okay. So I concur with everything that Dean mentioned, in addition to his very nice articulating technology advances. Telehealth has been accelerated to a very fast way. We've all been talking about it, but this situation really promoted the acceleration of it. We are seeing that almost 10 to 20% of the clinic visits now are done through telehealth versus less than 5% or very single digits. And in addition, care anywhere is getting momentum and attention. Full hospital at home is now in play, which is something very new. Patients coming to ER, for example, for certain diagnoses are getting discharged on their hospital at home to their homes, and they're being monitored by physicians remotely. And then the remotely observing physicians notify nursing and other professionals to go to their homes when they need something. This is really taking definitely a momentum via advanced technologies. We have also learned what works well and what needs improvement and enhancement on this platform during this pandemic. The adoption of the physicians actually wanting to perform their visits via telehealth has been impressive. Also, the patients wanting to not see their physician in person and just being satisfied by a visit via telehealth has also been very impressive. So it's actually connecting consumers, connecting with the consumers, helping them to stay healthy has been the benefits of the telehealth. In addition, I strongly believe that the telehealth is going to focus on wellness. Technology has helped us engage consumers in their wellness, try to keep them outside of the hospitals. So continuing to build on this platform is going to be very, very important for the advances that healthcare has to make in the future.
Thank you, Elise. I would love to get all of my shots and inoculations through a Zoom. So Elle, let me come to you. I know that you're at some luxurious hotel honoring your wife's birthday, as you should do. So like you, I'm in the shopping center business, and the shopping center business in 2020 was very, very difficult. The main thing was keeping our tenants in place and flourishing and making sure that they could open the door, turn on the lights. So I want to ask you, Elle, about retail real estate going forward. What do you think are the biggest challenges that exist out there? First of all, we know what they are for tenants. We've got to get them back open. But what about landlords and investors? How do you shape up in 2021 the shopping center industry?
Yeah, Jim, appreciate the time. I'm glad you got the vaccine as well. So good job on that. Look, the retail market, as you can tell, in 2020 had its challenges. You mentioned it. Keeping retailers open has been incredibly important. And as we look at getting the vaccine out there, there's a few things that are going to be important to retail's future from the retail perspective, and then I'll get into the investment perspective, the questions you asked. From the retailer's perspective, the government recently shifted to purple in the last couple of days, being able to open up outdoor dining and salons. So keeping these retailers open are going to be important. We have the PPP loan that's coming out, that's been rolled out, that will hopefully create some level of reprieve for the retailers in the short term. And then the vaccine rollout, getting that out and about so that these consumers can start getting into the stores and spending money. From an investment sales perspective, it is somewhat interesting. I think what's important, hopefully, for the audience is some nuggets for 2021 and beyond, and where we see retail from that perspective. And a couple of things I'll get into in 2020 that is important to highlight before we get in 2021 is that retail transactions were down 43% in 2020. This is retail investment sales. In LA, it was down 26%. So a relatively large decrease in transaction velocity, but what's most interesting is that pricing decreased somewhere around 4%. So the pricing has not moved as much as the transaction velocity has moved. And one big reason, most people look at retail and say retail is struggling, they're dying, there's not investments. But what we've noticed at Colliers in 2020 is that we have seen a lot of properties sell and transact. But, Jim, you remember being younger, playing the game of musical chairs. I want to make this example briefly. Do you remember that game?
It was a long time ago, El, but yes, I do remember.
So people always ask me, what do we see 2021 and why did pricing hold up so firm in 2020? If you remember the game musical chairs, you have chairs and then you have children sitting in those chairs. And music starts, and as the music stops, everyone has to grab a chair. And what's interesting about 2020 is that there was less people playing the game, but there was a significant less amount of chairs, which were the sellers within the market. So there's this perception that the market isn't strong. It's actually very strong from an investment perspective, hence why values have remained relatively strong, because sellers have been spending most of their time, and owners making sure that they keep their retailers in place. So there's been less supply of investment sales in the market, which it has been a decent time to sell product, and that's why pricing has remained relatively stable in 2020. So fast forward in 2021, we're going to see that trend continue. This first wave of retailers having struggles, there was a lot of rent deferral for April, May, and June. You probably saw that, Jim, in your centers. Was that enough? Oftentimes retailers are coming back and saying, hey, we need another 1, 2, 3 months. So we still continue to expect to see a shortage of supply of properties for sale on the market in 2021. At the same time, we still are seeing buyer demand, especially at certain price points. And we can get into that some other point in time where the opportunities exist. But in 2021, I expect pricing to remain relatively strong. I don't see it dropping nationally less than 5% for some product types. And for the essential businesses, grocery, drug, you may see cap rates remain relatively stable. And I'm not sure that's a rhetoric that most people would have out there in the market today, but that's what we're seeing. I think the bigger decrease in potential value may come in 2022 when there's about $23 billion of distressed debt out there on the retail side. It usually takes about 10 quarters for that debt to hit the market. So we may see a more significant drop in value in 2022, second quarter, third quarter, and then year end 2022. But unlike the last great recession, I see that more of these loans are being worked out than actually going to hit the market and transact. So again, I'm very favorable on the investment side of it. I know retailers are struggling, and hopefully we can find ways to help them. But from an investment sales perspective, retail has done relatively well despite the rhetoric, and I do see it continuing that in 2021, 2022.
Thank you, El. So Laurie, I want to come back to you, and I've kind of got a bulky question here. So the overarching question is, what do you see for the apartment business, the multifamily business in 2021? And are tenants going to be able to continue paying rent? Is there going to be more governmental intervention? Would you want to own an apartment building going into this particular market? What's out there for the landlords and the tenants?
Jim, I'm assuming that question was for me, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think for 2021, we're seeing a lot of the tenants struggling because of COVID. And we've experienced in 2020 a rent drop across Los Angeles, more so in the central business districts like downtown LA or Hollywood, somewhat on the west side. Interesting, we haven't seen as much rent drop in the San Fernando Valley areas. I think a lot of our tenants that were living in the core fled and went out towards the valley if they didn't have to work so close, if they were able to work remotely, so they didn't need to be in the core. But having said that, CBRE predicts that rents are going to continue to drop through the first two quarters of 2021, and they'll probably bottom out around the summer of this year. We expect them to be on average about 11% lower than our pre-pandemic levels. So what that's doing is a lot of, and there are quite a number of buildings where you have tenants in the building, but they're not paying rent. We've got the moratorium that was extended again, at least through February, so that the landlords aren't able to move out these tenants, and it may be extended again. And so we're finding that a lot of landlords that don't have to sell are not putting their buildings on the market because their buildings are in this state of flux with a higher vacancy and some tenants in place that aren't paying. It's hard to sell a building when you've got those kind of conditions going on. One of my clients said he's got an 80-unit apartment building and 24 of the tenants are not paying. So you can see it's a little messy right now, and until things, I'd say, stabilize, which we are thinking will probably happen in the third quarter of this year. Hopefully enough people will have been vaccinated by then. People will be hopefully back to work somewhat more than they are today, and we'll start to see rents start to come back. And then CB is projecting that we're going to have a robust recovery in rents. And so what that means is that once that happens, then we're going to start to see sales volume pick up. Although I will say with sales volume, now is a nice time to buy an apartment building for two reasons. One, we think that because the rents are a little bit down, you might be able to pick up a building for a little bit less than you would have in the past. And also interest rates are unbelievably low. So it's a great opportunity to lock in a long-term fixed interest rate at some levels that are just at historic lows. So it's an interesting dichotomy between having a building that may not be completely stabilized because of COVID, but then having great fundamentals looking forward into the future. So now might be a great time to take a look at looking at some assets.
Excellent. Thank you, Laurie.
Sure.
The next place I want to go, I love these kinds of questions that are unrehearsed, unscripted, and I'm going to have all of you answer. But what have you learned during the course of 2020 as that year is now behind us? What have you learned that you can do without, or that the particular segment of your industry can do without? Why don't we start with Elise?
Well, my answer is very brief. I like to say that I'll turn it to a positive. Let's believe and respect science. Trust the experts. Knowledge is important, and don't reject science. Educate yourself. There's amazing amount of knowledge out there, and I've been in healthcare myself for 40 years. I can't tell you how much I've learned this year by just reading and understanding science in 2020. So I encourage you all to do that. And thank you, Jim, for you taking your vaccine and having such a great introduction or opening today. Thank you.
Everybody should do it. Thank you, Elise. So Yannis, I'm going to come to you. What have you learned that we can do without from 2020 moving into this year?
Right. So I have learned that we can do without some, but only few things. I will name a couple. I can do without traffic. I can do without smog. I can do without spending too much time in a car. And we learned that we can connect via Zoom, but I must say that I can certainly do without the literal pain in the neck that often comes with it. I don't know whether you want to call it Zoomitis or something like that. I can also do without the constant availability expected from me or any one of us, that we should be available at any time and at any place. Because right now you cannot use the excuse, well, I'm out of town, I'm not in my office, I'll call later. So we have we don't have this excuse anymore. But I think we will borrow a number of useful lessons regarding connectivity, but I really don't believe that we can will be able to replace the in-person communication. I expect actually there will be a resurgence of in-person contact, because it's this purely digital connection, even though it may help us with respect to efficiencies, I think it detracts from creative engagement and from ability to brainstorm, the ability to intermingle, to socially interact in person, to experience random human collisions, as we call them, All this contributes greatly to new ideas, trains different parts of your brain, allows different ideas, and promotes innovation. So I really believe that the in-person experience will come back strong. And even though we will be in a hybrid mode of some sort and hybrid blend, I think that we should not underestimate the desire of people to be together and intermingle and allow different ideas and experiences together. So I think that this is a lesson that we learned significantly. Even though we are digitally connected, I think we are missing a significant number of the in-person interaction. So I think that will continue in the future.
Great, thank you, Yannis. Elle, let me come to you. What do you think we could do without?
Yeah, great question. I'm going to take it a different direction. You know, one area that we had that I could do without would be, you know, just opinions being considered facts. And I think we've all understand where that comes from. But retail industry, and you know this better than anyone here, Jim, is that there's this negative perception that has surrounded it. It's not just a pandemic, it was prior to the pandemic. And, you know, the negative sort of baseless claims surrounding retail, I'm excited and I'd like to do without it. Having so much rhetoric politically in the last, you know, let's call it 12 months or so, where opinions were considered facts. I'm looking forward to moving on to a year where we take facts as facts and we look at those to determine what our opinions are.
Excellent, thank you, Elle. Laurie, I want to come to you with that same question. What can we do without?
Well, I really think that we could do without as much in-person contact. And I think that going to the office 5 days a week and having to be physically at certain meetings and driving across town, creating more traffic, I think that I definitely could see going forward without having all of those demands every day. And I think that the efficiency of working from home, saving the drive time, maybe not having to get all dressed up to the nines every day. I think some of us are actually getting more work done and having some more personal time. I started a new exercise regime that I never had time to do before. So I really like that. And I don't think I want to give up completely all of that. I do miss being in the office, but I don't know that I would need to do it 5 days a week.
Okay, good. Elise, did I get to you?
Yes.
Okay, so then let me circle back. And Laurie, just relative to your comment about not having to get dressed up every day, which is probably kind of a nice change. I, on the other hand, I lounge around the house dressed like this. So, you know, it doesn't bother me at all. All right, I want to come back, and it's a little offshoot of the same question. Last year was at least an entertaining year, if not explosive year politically. So we got some of that political stuff behind us. But from the perspective of your industries, what should we be watchful for relative to some potential changes coming as a result of our elections? And if you also want to look forward a little bit, in 2022, we have a new governor, a new election for our governor. We also have another election for our mayor, which he is now termed out. So from a political standpoint, what are you kind of being cautious about, and how are you advising your colleagues and clients about what to look for or what to avoid? With that, let me start with Elle. Why don't you take the first shot at that?
Yeah, thanks, Jim. So, you know, retail, I'm going to try to pertain it to retail politically, how it could shape that industry specifically. And, you know, number one is just we've had to start and stop on the opening and closing of business. Number two is the PPP loan. How is that going to be enough? When it does get in the hands of the consumers, will they spend at brick and mortar retail? And then number three is just the vaccination, how quickly that'll get out. Some other interesting topics that we didn't address, Jim, that was a pretty big win in November was, I'm sure you kept an eye on it, was Prop 15, right? That was on the ballot. and how that affect, commercial real estate. And that was a big win for the commercial real estate sector. That would have passed through a significant amount of taxes to the businesses on the retail side. And as you know, those retailers will be passing that back off. The landlords would have to pass that tax increase off to the tenants, which would then have to absorb and most likely hike prices. So I'd say keep an eye on that. That seems to continue to pop up within the industry. And then also making sure that politically we're able to get these stores open safely and get people out there shopping safely.
Thank you, El. Laurie?
Okay, well, I think that from a political point of view right now, what we're seeing in the real estate investment world is a lot of real estate investors are very nervous about the proposal of this new administration to get rid of the 1031 tax deferred exchange opportunities. And that has a lot of people who own real estate very frightened. Typically, for those that aren't aware of what that means, is when you own a commercial property, you can, when you sell it, instead of just paying taxes on all your gains, if you buy another like-kind investment property for that value or higher than what you sold the other one for, you can defer your taxes. You could roll your basis into the new property and defer it. And you can keep doing that until at the end, when in your final property, then you would pay the taxes based upon your basis from the first one you owned. Anyway, it's a great way to stimulate the economy, to keep the transactions moving, keep people from moving it in and out of investments. And if that shuts down, I think that's going to cause a big impact on the economy. And also, I think it's because a lot of people are not going to want to sell their properties because they'll have to pay a lot of taxes. So that's one issue. Another one is their proposal that they're going to increase capital gains. That's got investors very nervous about that as well, which would also stop people from potentially selling, especially if they can't do that 1031 exchange. And then lastly, from a multi-housing perspective, we have, we have a homeless problem. We've got an affordable housing problem throughout LA and California and pretty much the country. But the pressure now, especially within Los Angeles, for developers to build new projects that have a component of affordable housing, and for also the politicians to enact more rent control on buildings that already exist, is something that has investors quite nervous about, because once they, as they did in the past, like in November, there was some rent control on buildings that did not have rent control, and it definitely did impact their current values. They were taken down when a wand gets waved and now your building is under a rent control provision. So we may see more rent control provisions coming down the pike as the state and the county try to keep rents suppressed so that it's more affordable for a greater number of people.
All right, so Laurie, I don't want to leave you. Yannis, I'll be to you in just 30 seconds relative to what we should be watchful for relative to political change. But Laurie, I want to come back to that rent control issue for a moment. So won't rent control, any iteration of it, further depress or maybe stymie the multifamily business?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, when there's rent control, for instance, one of the things that they're saying now is that for buildings that are 15 years old or older, they are now under rent control. So a 2002 built building used to not be under rent control. Now it is. And so if you were somebody that owned that building, 2 years ago, you could raise the rent to whatever the market would allow. Today, you can't. Now, granted, they did give you the opportunity to raise it to, right now it stands at 5% per year plus a CPI increase. So if the consumer price index increase was, say, 3%, presumably you could raise a tenant annually that year 8%, right? 5 plus 3. But we feel with this legislation in place that they could easily change those percentages. They could say, well, the base is not going to be 5, it's going to be 2, or it'll be 1. So it will suppress what an owner can raise the rents to. And what we found in the past was when you have that kind of restriction, people don't want to invest and improve their properties if they know that they're tapped out on what they can charge for rent.
You know, I understand all of that, but multifamily investments have been such an investor darling that I was wondering if there's any kind of legislation that would ever slow that train down.
Well, I think this will slow the train down from it being the darling. We have seen, because of what, California has enacted, some of our owners have said that they want to sell their apartment buildings in California and actually buy somewhere else in the country. But then there are a lot of investors that really believe in California as a great place for investment. And we still have great fundamentals. We have a lot of demand and we have a shortage of housing. So it should keep I think the future of multifamily still in check and still attractive, but just potentially not as attractive as it once was if rent control burdens become even more burdensome.
All right, thank you, Laurie. So I want to swing back, Yannis, to you. And again, the original question was, from the perspective of what you do in the engineering field, what has the political landscape for your particular segment of life done to change your industry, and what should we and you be watchful for?
Thanks. I think that as I mentioned before, I'm very optimistic about the future of science, technology, engineering. I can see the directions that the new administration is giving to the Office of Science Technology Policy, which essentially informs the federal agencies in terms of supporting what type of science and technology work will be supported. And there are a number of initiatives that I think will be useful. First of all, the creating perhaps a new healthcare system based on health informatics. The experience that we learned from this, how we combat the pandemic, development of vaccines against new pathogens, resistance to antibiotics. I think these will be important areas for support. The second area of support, I think, will be in the area of renewable technologies, zero carbon technologies, clean energy, carbon capture and sequestration. These are interesting, exciting ideas. As you know, there is a lot of work, a lot of interesting technologies that have been developed there. So I think there will be potentially more support of these technologies. The third area, huge area, is the area of artificial intelligence, AI, and everything related to data, machine learning, data sciences, how to maintain and expand world leadership in this area, as well as in areas like synthetic biology. These are important areas that will essentially need to be have to make investments, because these technologies will ensure to drive the economy of the future. And finally, the most important thing that we should expect is additional support of the ecosystem of innovation. And how do we make sure that the United States remains a magnet for the best and brightest across the world? And I think that we're likely to see changes that will be reflected in this the government priorities that will allow us to continue being the leader of the world in many of these very important technologies. And this will have tremendous impact on the economy of the future. So I'm quite optimistic about the support of science and technology in the coming years.
Great, thank you, Yannis. So Elle, I want to come back to you. Every day as a shopping center guy, I hold my breath when I take and open up my computer and I want to read about what's coming down from Sacramento or what's happening, with, some type of pronouncement coming from the LA County leadership or from the mayor of Los Angeles. And when close downs and shutdowns happen, I think it's crippling. And, the country is built on the backs of small business. And, and small business has generated incredible growth for so many major industries. But my question, Elle, to you is, moving forward in the shopping center business, how are you going to help some of your small tenant clients get through all of this?
Yeah, Jim, I hold my breath every time too. So good news is you're not the only one that does. what I have noticed, and I'll get to what we should do, but what I have noticed is how resilient they've been. I'm sure you've seen that as well. When the pandemic really hit in March, early March, and the closures started April, May, June, most landlords were providing deferrals for those 3 or 4 months worth of rent, which the tenant would have to pay back. And then, over some period of time, 12 to 18 months is what we saw. And generally, the local mom and pops, as you mentioned, 60% of them were paying rent even though they're closed. That number came all the way up to 85% in October. So they've been paying rent despite the challenges that they face. So more than anyone, we need to help them. I think landlords continuing to provide them with flexibility during this time. As you know, when retailers go out, it's very difficult and expensive to backfill them with the shifting demand of retailer sizes and the challenges with breaking or combining spaces to allow for new shifts in the size that they want. So I would say the continuation of seeing how the PP loan will help them in the short term, increase consumer spending, ultimately the speed of getting the vaccine out. But really, it's going to be landlords' ability to keep these guys in place until a point in time when they're able to continue to generate additional consumer spending at the brick and mortar locations. But what I will tell you, Jim, the one thing I want to leave you with is it's been incredibly positive how resilient these retailers have been. To see them continuously pay rent despite the challenges. Again, the most recent study was that they're 86% of these local mom and pops are paying rent, and they were originally 60% of them. At the height of the market, it was 94%. So they're not too far off where they were before. So it does seem that landlords like yourself and the community is helping keeping these guys going. I'm looking forward to continue to see that in 2021. And as the market starts opening up and the vaccine is out there, I feel very strong about the rebound that we're going to see.
Excellent. Okay, thank you, El. So Elise, I want to come back to you and let's stay on the vaccine for a moment. As we talk about our economy still being in flux, the vaccine has basically breathed and created new life into the attitudes and hopefully the futures of a lot of our businesses. So my question to you is, how do you see healthcare organizations, just like those that you oversee, being able to contribute to the economic and actual health of our communities? What are you going to do to help muscle up these business communities?
Thank you. So I have a great faith that we will all be here. Healthcare will be here regardless of any type of crisis. We're used to crisis and we come out of it greatly. In many markets, in many cities, our healthcare systems are the largest employer and their economic engine to many markets and cities. So we'll continue to do that. We provide employment. We're supporting the service industry in a major way, and we're going to continue to stay strong. Additionally, what we're working on is, a lot of healthcare organizations are working on is staying focused on health disparities, making sure that there's health education in our communities, healthy eating, understanding prevention, understanding wellness. So all of this will really encourage our populations to stay healthy and viable and vital in order for us to continue having strong economies in the days and months to come. And we're going to continue as healthcare industry to support the public health, close the gap for the public health, be their partner with their really partner with them, because we know how to do this and really get people back to work, which is what we do well.
Thank you, Elise. All right, panel, last question for all of you. I'm going to go right around the horn. Here it is. Is there anything coming out of this pandemic that will forever alter your industry, forever change what life was like prior to the pandemic and coming out of it? What will change? Laurie, why don't you kick off?
Well, I think, I mentioned the work at home space built into apartment buildings. I think also within apartment buildings, I think that they will be more conscious of the community space and cleaning that down, disinfecting it. I think that there'll be more touchless types of opening doors and things like that. So I think we'll see that. I think we might see more mask wearing, even like during a common flu season, when after we're beyond COVID, just because people realize that you can probably eliminate just getting the common cold by doing things that we weren't doing before. So I think those will be some permanent changes. And then, like I mentioned, I also think that I think landlords will use videos more often to show off space. Like if they're trying to rent apartments, I think they'll even be a little bit more interactive with using technology instead of getting people through as physically as much as they were in the past. And same with transactions. We've already seen buyers that don't want to go to do a unit by unit inspection because of COVID. They've been able to use a laptop and just walk through the building with the buyer directing which way to point the laptop so that they could watch it through Zoom and literally look at the kitchen and the bathroom and inspect the units without actually having to go inside the tenant's unit, but have the tenant show it with their own computer. So that could also change the way that we do things.
Excellent, thank you. So Elle, is there anything coming out of this pandemic that's going to forever alter the shopping center business? The method of leasing, whatever you.
Well, there's been a lot of shifts. I'd say number one, the consumer behavior has shifted. I think because of the shifts, there's going to be changes in the design elements on shopping centers. The addition of the ability for outdoor spaces. I think restaurant pickup windows, drive-throughs, curbside access. Also, I think, what we've realized with a lot of these bankruptcies, and you see this firsthand, is it's incredibly expensive to break up boxes. So I think there's going to be a more creative way to develop shopping centers in ways that they can expand, combine spaces and break up spaces, and giving people the ability to, continue to work the way they have, which is, that curbside. I don't know about you, Jim, but I spend a lot of time. I have two young kids, and we spent a lot of time, Dick's Sporting Goods curbside was a big proponent of our day-to-day life, trying to keep these two boys busy. And I definitely see that these elements from a development perspective will continue in the future because of the shift in consumer spending and the way in which retailers are going to have to adapt to that shift.
I have two kids as well, and they're both out of college. And the big change I'm finding is that I'm writing curbside checks. Nobody wants to play with me, but they do come home for financial resources. So Yannis, what's going to forever change your industry and how you plan for it?
So impacts from the pandemic, lessons from the pandemic have been that you can actually deliver education in terms of knowledge, perhaps, through distance learning. And this is something that I must say that at USC, we have recognized this for a very long time. In engineering school, we had this distance learning program since 1972, not in a digital form that is today, but for a long time. Nonetheless, I think this will be very good for retraining, for reskilling, for lifelong learning. I think you will see a lot of new methods of delivering this type of knowledge and education for people who want to learn more. At the same time, the 18 to 22 kids, the ones that want to go to the university to essentially transform themselves and follow, perhaps explore new ideas and new horizons, I think this will continue in a different way, perhaps, because, instead of having the traditional method of teaching, which is simply we call the sage on the stage, will convert into a lot of the guide on the side, which means a lot of mentoring, a lot of support, a lot of extracurricular activities, student groups, creating mindsets of growth, not simply knowledge and skills alone, but the ability to create humans that have critical thinking, have the ability to function in a very different and transformative way, given the fact that, as I mentioned, the world is going to keep changing exponentially fast. And we want to make sure that our kids, as they graduate, have these ideas in mind and these mindsets to be agile and to be able to adapt to the situations as they come along. I think that's actually the best tool we can give to the kids we educate in a university. So this is how I see the future. I find it to be very exciting, and I think that will be a new hybrid way of doing things for the benefit of all.
Thank you so much, Yannis. At least you're going to wrap it up here for you. And this is probably a huge answer for you, but healthcare is probably forever changed. But what is specifically going to change for you and your organizations going forward?
I strongly believe that this situation is accelerating wellness and prevention. Health systems are shifting more to health and not just care. Consumers are becoming more responsible and accountable for their health. As I mentioned, hospital without walls are coming about, and health systems are going to take or have started taking an active role in the public health arena. I strongly believe that this is really a paradigm shift that's happening in our industry, and a lot of focus is around health and well-being coming about. So it's exciting times.
Well, let me thank my panelists. I think you're all brilliant, and it's obvious why you were selected to participate on this particular forecast. Josh, I'm going to toss it back to you.
Well, thank you so much, Jim, and really to our entire panel. So many great takeaways for us to think about. Laurie, you started off talking about the workspace incorporations into apartments and condos and what that might look like in the future. So I'm glad you came back to that and talked about it, because I think it's going to be significantly impactful to the multifamily sector moving forward. I think it's going to be something that's going to be required in order to compete. And I appreciate the fact that we can have discussions with differing opinions here, just hearing the different sides and understanding what human interaction and the need for technology versus face-to-face contact in business and what that's going to look like in the future. I think it's going to be interesting, and it's going to be an ongoing conversation. I think it's probably going to end up somewhere in the middle. I think it's probably going to be a hybrid of both moving forward for a lot of industries. I do agree that telehealth is here to stay in some way. And, as I talk to, whether it be friends, colleagues, or clients, the idea of always being available and always being on, it continues to be a challenge for employers and employees alike. We're all so accessible today. And at some point, there's got to be some type of balance. And I think we'll get there. So I want to thank everybody from our first panel. I'm really excited to move into our next one. We're going to talk about what's new in 2021 from the standpoint of finance, accounting, our communities, and really just business in general. So here with me, and please welcome our panelists, Jack Karagulleyan, Managing Director, Tax with KPMG, Kandee Lewis, Chief Executive Officer with Positive Results Center, and Deepika Sandhu, Partner Financial Operations with the Connor Group. Thank you all so much for joining us. I'm really excited to get this going. So our first question, we heard it from the first group, and I thought it was a good one. So I'm going to sort of readdress it and repackage it to you, because I think given your industries, you're going to have some different perspectives. So this actually came from our audience originally, and then we incorporated it in. With the political landscape now changed and seemingly continuing to change on a daily basis. So from the perspective of your industries, what should we all be watchful for right now? And Kandee, let's start with you on that.
Thank you very much, Josh. It's a pleasure to be here. So from the political standpoint, coming from the nonprofit landscape, I really want to talk about funding. What does that look like for our community? Because small to mid-sized nonprofits have been devastated. Just in December, 500,000 people lost their jobs in nonprofit. That is going to make a major impact in our community. And so many of us are working in underfunded, disadvantaged communities, and we are the ones that they're coming to. So we're the boots on the ground. We are the trusted people. So we need to look at what does funding look like? Where is it going to come from? How is it going to stabilize not only our organizations, but the community as well? How are we going to create jobs? We also need to look at, from our community standpoint, racism, sexism, and just the general tone of the world. How is that going to show up? Because we've seen so much happen over the last year, not even including what has happened before, but that has made a major impact in our community on how we communicate, how we serve the community, and what resources are also available. And then we also need to look at education. Education is going to be very critical. The first panel talked about it some, but no one expected parents to be teachers. We also didn't expect our children to be home. And so we're working from home, we're trying to take care of our children, and we don't have the resources and tools, especially in disadvantaged communities. If you think about the fact that the parents are working from home so that they have their internet, the children, if there's someone in elementary, middle school, and high school, everyone needs their own laptop, and the resources just are not there. And then last but not least, let's look at the distribution of the COVID vaccine. How is that going to impact our community? Who's going to get it? So we have people that have to go to work. They don't have the luxury of working from home. And so are they going to get the resources first? We know that we've already seen the healthcare providers get it. But what about the people that are working in supermarkets? Those that have to catch the bus going back and forth to work, and then they're coming back home to their family. So those are some things that we're really concerned about.
Kandee, thanks for sharing that. I mean, that's an astounding number when you talk about 500,000 nonprofit jobs lost. It's not just the impact of those who have lost the jobs, it's the impact of the services they were providing and the people that they were reaching out to and the impact in their communities. And I think so many of us can resonate with the comments about, parents struggling to be teachers. I'm a great example. I'm here in between questions, I'm operating Zoom school in the room next door for two little girls. I'm not a teacher, but it's something that we're all doing. At some point, our children need to get back to school, but they need to be there in a safe environment.
Absolutely.
So hopefully we'll get there. Same question to you, Deepika. What should we be looking for from your industry standpoint?
Yeah, so I focus a lot on fast-moving, high-growth, pre-IPO and recently IPO'd companies. And from our perspective, we are really looking forward to the continued or to the expected stimulus that will be coming and the injection that'll make into the economy. We had a record high number of IPOs in the prior year, and it was in fact 20% greater than the prior top year, which was the year 2000. And we are definitely on trend for another record-setting year in 2021. But a lot of that is going to be based on the stimulus and the current administration's ability to get that through in the first 100 days. So we know for the first 6 months that we do plan to see quite a bit of activity in this space. I think the question will be, how does that activity trickle on throughout the year and in the second 6 months of the year in particular? And also, will it start to impact industries that did not benefit at all from 2020? Because there were certain industries that did quite well in 2020. Will we see a further expansion into other industries that were very hurt? So will that stimulus reach those spaces and allow them to continue the growth that they enjoyed before the pandemic hit?
Thanks, Deepika. We'll talk a little bit more about sort of the emerging businesses and IPO landscape in just a little bit. Jack, I'd love to get your thoughts. What should we be on the lookout for?
Absolutely, Josh. From a tax perspective, we've seen more change in the last 3 years than we have in the prior 30 years combined. And 2021 seems to have even more change on the way. There's no doubt that taxes are an important part of the Biden agenda in 2021. As you all know, Democrats narrowly control the House on an 11-seat edge, and they have a tiebreaker in the Senate with Vice President's vote. This dramatically increases the chances that at least some parts of the Biden tax plan can now become law. But which ones, how soon, how much, we don't know yet, and it's too early to tell. Just this last week, President Biden released an outline of the first part of his two-part relief and recovery plan, a $1.9 trillion COVID-19 relief package. Whether the relief bill attracts sufficient bipartisan support in the Senate for the 60 votes required to end debate, or whether Senate Democrats resort to budget reconciliation, is going to provide an early indication of the speed and direction of what we can expect in 2021. If it does end up in a budget reconciliation process, this is going to only require a simple majority of 51 votes, but chances are this is going to lead to difficult negotiation, and not everything on the wish list would pass in that scenario. So something to watch out for. And the second recovery plan expected later on in the year. No details have been released on that recovery plan yet, but we know that it's likely to be expensive and include new spending initiatives for infrastructure, education, climate change, healthcare. And it's also likely that much of the Biden's tax plan, presumably based on his campaign proposals, will be in there. That tax plan could offset some of the costs of the spending initiatives, at least in the short run, while potentially reducing deficits in the long term. So it's definitely going to be an interesting year ahead from a tax side with a lot of moving pieces.
Thanks, Jack. Staying a little bit on topic here, I want to ask maybe a deeper question on the same subject. What's the legislative outlook, and what can we expect under the new administration in 2021? Meaning, what are you seeing, and specifically, how do you think your clients are going to be impacted?
Well, Josh, the initial 1.9 trillion relief plan is targeted specifically for COVID relief, including state and local governments, schools, vaccinations, testing, and additional $1,400 rebate payment for some individuals that qualify. But we anticipate the recovery portion that will be passed later in the year to include more specific provisions impacting businesses. So far, what we know about the Biden tax plan is that it has proposed increasing taxes on both individuals and businesses on ordinary rates and the capital gain rates. These increases may potentially not come into play until 2022. We've seen it be retroactively applied to 2021, but that depends on when they get it passed. It will likely be necessary to include some of that to offset some of the spending initiatives we mentioned earlier. In addition to raising the tax rates, the plan outlines potentially raising taxes on certain foreign operations, creating a new corporate minimum tax, and making some targeted changes to certain industries, such as real estate. Laurie in the earlier panel talked about 1031. That's one that a lot of our clients are looking at closely, pharmaceuticals, banking, and a couple of industries. So again, because of the potential for having a budget reconciliation process, we still don't know which of these provisions may end up passing or what the final provision may look like by the time it gets passed. So depending on who you talk to on Capitol Hill, this could cost anywhere from 2 to 3 trillion more. And Biden's plan will also likely include some new and expanded tax credits for businesses that will help incentivize and stimulate the economy. There's been talk about domestic manufacturing, helping to bring back onshore. We saw just a few days ago that Joe Biden announced the Made in America plan, that again, more incentives. So I think we're going to see a lot more of that. So in summary, our clients are going to be impacted somehow, right? And it does depend on the industry and what they do. And they need to be prepared for these changes coming their way and understand and plan ahead for the potential impacts so that they're able to take advantage of the opportunities and avoid any potential pitfalls.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like there are a lot of things in motion. Time's going to tell when it comes down to it.
Absolutely.
Deepika, same question. What are you seeing for your clients, and how are they going to be impacted?
I think we're really looking forward to seeing the stimulus and seeing how far-reaching it will be and into what industries. As I said earlier, I think we saw certain industries extremely benefited very well from the 2020 landscape. Their businesses were completely in tune to our work-at-home environments and the things that were happening at that time, and that fueled a lot of those companies moving into the IPO market, right, as well. I think what we're looking to see now is to understand, will we be able to go beyond that as things slowly do reopen, as the money does start to come into the system? Who does it touch? Who does it help? And will it allow that expansion to happen to those industries that were so devastated really by the events of 2020? And that's the kind of recovery that we're really hoping for, that we see it across the board.
Yeah, I appreciate that. We'll certainly have to continue to write about and learn more and provide information to our readers as time goes on. These first 2 quarters, I think, are going to be very telling. Kandee, I want to go back to something you said. You mentioned the communities and the impact on the communities, and you talked about job losses in the nonprofit sector. My question is this: as we know, different communities are impacted in very, very different ways. So my thoughts and my question to you is, how is the economic forecast How is that affected by marginalized and disadvantaged communities?
That's a great question. First, let's be real. Right now, we're living through 3 pandemics. COVID-19 has devastated our community, and we would probably need 2 or 3 days to have that conversation. We're also looking at the violence against Black people, as well as domestic violence. So if we're talking about in our community, we know for a fact that we have job loss, we have severe job loss, we have hunger and poverty, we have people have lost their homes. And so we have many families that have, I want to say, bundled up, for lack of a better word. The 2 and 3 and 4 families have combined their resources and have moved in together. Right now, we're looking at a parent who is not only taking care of their child, but they're also taking care of their family and their parents. And if we're looking at it from a lens of social justice and equity, there was never a level playing field, and now the field has decreased. It has almost virtually disappeared in many cases. Let's just look at schools. We talked about it earlier. So children need laptops, children need headphones, children each need their own headphone and laptop. And also they all need a higher set of internet. So there were organizations that have provided free laptops and also free internet, but they weren't the newest, the greatest, or the best. They're very slow. They're not able to function. And if there are 2 or 3 or 4 different people in the house trying to get on the system, that doesn't work. Also, many kids are not set up to learn virtually. So our kids are lagging behind. I just read an article the other day that one school district had a 600% failure rate in their students. Now that's scary given the fact that our children are our future. They're going to be our future doctors, teachers, lawyers, educators, and elected officials, but we're not serving them. So when we're looking at our community, we need an infusion of capital, we need jobs, and even as simple as food. The food insecurity is real. There are organizations that are providing food all over the county, but what was scary about some of them, they said you have to drive up. Do they not realize that having a car in Los Angeles is a luxury? So what do you do for the person who doesn't have a car, who's hungry, who doesn't have the resources to drive up and get something? Those are just a couple of the things that we're looking at. In addition to the fact that I read an article that the World Bank estimated that 200 million people will sink into poverty as a result of COVID-19. That's 200 million people that will sink into poverty. And it also talked about the world's richest people in a 10-month period during COVID. What they lost, they gained back. But for the poorest people, it's going to take them 10 years just to get back to a level playing field.
Kandee, I love the concept that you introduce of, the 3 pandemics sort of colliding at the same time. I think that's really important for us to remember as we talk about the state of the economy and the state of our communities. And I think you make valid points when you talk about schooling and how dependent our children are on technology. It's not just the laptops, as you point out, it's the bandwidth of the internet, and it's the other parents working in the home using that bandwidth and sharing it, and it's the other children in the home going to school right next to them. And so it creates challenges. And we have houses divided. My own 2 girls, one absolutely thrives and loves the online model. The other despises it. It's not conducive to how she wants to learn and what makes her interested. So yeah, that's something that's going to continue to need to be addressed. Again, I'm hoping that we're getting closer to that.
Well, Alex, I'm sorry, Josh, can I also add in that many times children don't even have a dedicated area where they can learn. So that is really important as well. What kind of environment are we setting up for them to learn? And then there has been this this influx of online schooling and mentoring, but in communities of color, it is difficult to afford to have a quality mentor. So we need to look at how can we invest in providing mentor programs and services to children in areas that are disadvantaged.
Agreed. And thank you for sharing that and reminding us of that perspective. You know, the first panel talked about, just moving, continue on to COVID, but looking at it from a different standpoint. We talked about the impacts of COVID week after week. The Business Journal writes about businesses that have found a way to discover silver linings, as tough as that can be. My question is, out of all the changes that your business or your industry have had over this past year, what was the most positive? What would you say most positively impacted your employees and the people that ultimately lead to your company's success? Deepika, I'd like to start with you.
Yeah, it's a great question. We actually surveyed our clients back in June to really understand what was the impact of having to basically stop completely on middle of March working in the office and transition fully to being a remote workforce. And how did that go for them from the perspective of their financials and actually being able to close their books and do their day-to-day accounting and finance jobs effectively? And what we found is that most of these companies that we surveyed were able to transition to a fully remote workforce very well. And in fact, when it came to closing their books and doing the activities within their accounting and finance organization, they were able to do them just as timely and effectively as when they were in the office. Of course, the thing that everybody missed, and I think the panel previously alluded to this, was our human connection, our regular interactions, all that water cooler talk, the things that happen in the hallways. They were missing that. But from the perspective of, did they have the tools and technologies to be able to transition to this remote workforce and still be effective? That proved positive, and I think, or that proved to be true. And I think what that also can mean for us in terms of silver linings is, how we're able to establish our workforce moving forward, right? Where will they be? How will they work? I think we were experimenting with all of this stuff before. Some of us may have worked at home once or twice a week, if we were lucky. I think we're going to find much more diverse ways of working as we move forward. And that's certainly what we saw with our clients.
Jack, from sort of an accounting standpoint, what are you seeing as a most positive outcome this past year?
Well, Josh, we're famous for our tax seasons, which pretty much are all around the year now with all the rule changes. But I would say the most positive element for us was, usually we would stay at the office late hours, and busy season is still tough, but at least we're at home and we're able to wear various hats and be more efficient. And I've seen generally our industry be a lot more flexible on the people side and just help everyone from staff to partners adjust to their new environments. And people have shown, I agree with everything Deepika mentioned, and people have shown us that they could get things done remotely. And I think it will change some business models in the future, creating more efficiencies, right? And in the past, if we were meeting with executives of a potential client or existing client and they're in San Francisco, we would hop on to the Burbank airport, fly to San Francisco, come back later on that night for 1 hour meetings, 30-minute meetings, and it just doesn't make sense. And in the past, there wasn't such a thing as board meetings via Zoom or Teams, and now I think it's a lot more common and accepted, and it's just going to help to create more efficiencies. Travel will still be there, and it will definitely be relevant for certain situations, but it's just going to help everybody accomplish more and create more time for things that are important to them personally. So and it was mentioned earlier, but I don't think anyone also misses the LA traffic, right? I mean, that right there for me personally was save the hour and a half a day that I can now do other things. So my dog's a lot happier about that, and she gets her daily walks up the hill. So.
Thanks, Jack. I think you sort of just married Dean Yortsos' thoughts with Laurie's thoughts that were somewhat different. Kandee, what are your thoughts on that?
It's definitely the people. The people have been amazing and resourceful. Let me just tell you about some great things that are happening in our community. Someone came up with a great idea about a community refrigerator. So all over South Los Angeles, Watts, Compton, you'll find a refrigerator that is set up so anyone who is hungry or in need of food can open up the refrigerator and take out whatever they want. There is no fee for this. Also, there's a great organization that has taken it upon themselves to start feeding the community. They took money out of their pocket. They reached out to other organizations such as ours, and we helped and supported them. And to date, they've fed about 9,700 people. And then we all looked, like our organization looked at how can we quickly pivot. We were the touchy-feely, in-your-face, hands-on organization. And so we went quickly online and started providing weekly programming on trauma to support people just to deal with the things that we're going through. During the summer, when there were so many walks and talks and conversations and just people feeling so much because of the violence that was going on, we provided platforms for people to just have something to say. One of the things that we forgot about in this is our human connection. So we were accustomed to meeting, and this would allow people to have an opportunity to come together and have conversation and share their feelings and their thoughts. So definitely it's been the people pulling together, providing food and resources and rides for other people, even when they had just a little bit. It's like we went back in time to a date when if one family had a steak and another one had potatoes and another one had a car, so we would do whatever we needed to make sure that it happened. And that's the beauty of our community. We will not stop. We will not fail. We will not give up. We're going to do whatever it takes to be successful. We just need people to help us.
Well, you're right. It's definitely about the people. I mean, you mentioned such a simple concept, but we've seen community libraries for how long now, where you leave a book, you take a book, and they're all over the country. The idea of a community refrigerator where you leave some food for somebody who needs it, or you take it if you need it. That's that's such a simple concept, but something that it sounds new. I've never heard of this before. I think that's amazing.
It is definitely amazing. It has provided just an opportunity for someone to be able to get something as necessary as food without feeling like, okay, I have to go and ask someone for something. Even sanitary supplies. We've been gifted sanitary supplies to provide to people in the community. I was in a store one day and there was a young girl, 14 years old, who was about to be arrested because she had stole sanitary supplies. And I was really taken back that the manager of the store and the police were actually going to arrest this young lady for stealing, excuse my language, Kotex, when this is something that she needs. And so we reached out to another organization and they provided us with about 100 boxes of sanitary supplies just to give to the community. So we have to really rethink what is critical, what is important, and what is something that we can say, this is not a want, this is a need, and how can we fulfill that need?
Yeah, I think, it's an interesting concept, rethinking. I mean, just the idea, sometimes it's the ask that is the deterrent for somebody getting something they need. And in some of these new ideas, you've eliminated that deterrent. And I think that's great. Kandee, you use the word pivot. So I'm going to pivot here and get back to, we talked about IPOs and kind of what the landscape looks like. I really just recently had read that, I think it was within the last 3 or 4 days, that Bumble's CEO is going to be the youngest female co-founder to lead through an IPO next month. So that's fantastic. As we look at the landscape for emerging businesses, what should companies be doing to create, for lack of better words, a clear path for growth, including IPOs as a strategy for 2021? Deepika.
Yeah, absolutely. First off, I just want to acknowledge some of the things that Kandee is saying, because I think, I'm talking about IPOs and these companies that have done amazing in 2020 and that will continue to thrive into 2021. And Kandee is talking about the dire straits of so many people who are so affected. And I think this goes to highlight this point that there really have been two Americas in this country, right? Economically, socially, on every level. And there are some folks you would never know that there was a pandemic and a deficit in the economy and such a struggle going on today, and some who can't even imagine that there are companies and people who are doing so exceedingly well in this environment. So I feel, Kandee, that it's the right conversation to have together, because it is showing the striking way that we're all living today, right? And how different things can be across the street, if you will. And I wanted to at least acknowledge that as I talk more about IPOs and things that are happening in my industry. But in terms of for the companies that are thriving today and for the ways that they are growing and that they are projecting, when they are starting to think about IPOs and going down that path further, I always say you don't just want to think about the day that you're going to be sitting there on the floor of the stock exchange ringing that bell. That will be pretty exciting. It's kind of like you don't just want to think about the wedding day. I want you to start to think about the marriage too, right? What is it actually going to look like to be and function as a public company? So for those of you that are part of organizations that are rapidly growing, starting to think about what are the requirements of being a public company? What do I need to be able to do efficiently and effectively in order to report my financial results out into the world? These are very important steps that companies need to start to consider early. So don't just consider the set of activities that it takes in order to become public, really start to think early about the steps that it's going to take to actually function efficiently and effectively once you are a public company. And that's everything from who are the people on the team? Do I have people in the right roles? Do I have the right processes to support the work that needs to be done as a public company to meet those public company standards? And do I have systems, tools, technologies that are going to continue to support that as well?
Yeah, thanks. And as we continue to talk about some of these strategies, and we heard from our first panel, some growth strategies in different industries, getting a little bit more granular here on the financial and the tax side. From a tax perspective, Jack, what new tax planning initiatives or positions are available to businesses in 2021? I know that there's things that we think may or may not be available based on the legislation, based on the new administration, and things that are not able to get passed in the next many months. But what are things that we believe will be available to business that your client should be revisiting this year?
Absolutely. So we discussed a little bit about what's coming down the pipeline, but I think it's also important to look at some of the new rules passed over the last year. And so specifically, a few things I want to highlight. Just in December last month, the Consolidated Appropriations Act was passed, and there was really something for just about everybody in this act. The major ones that I want to talk about there was an extension and expansion of the Employee Retention Credit, which also known as the ERC, which has been critical for many businesses in order to help them hold on to their employees in the event they weren't able to get a PPP loan or qualify for one. With these recent changes, the ERC now applies to wages paid all the way up until June 30th, 2021, so it extends it for 2 quarters. From an eligibility perspective, the gross receipts decline test to qualify as an eligible employer has been reduced from 50% to 20%. So if you looked at it last year, it's definitely worth revisiting this piece, as it could be very critical for potentially getting a significant credit. And speaking of the size of the credit, the employee qualified wages have been increased from 10K per year to 10K per quarter for wages in 2021, which significantly expands the benefit. Group health plan costs are now considered to be qualified wages, even if no other wages are paid to an employee. And this is retroactive back to March in the event that there was a furlough and whatnot. So that would even qualify. And then with the CARES Act back in March, companies had to choose between the ERC and the PPP and went through a modeling exercise. But with the recent rules, it's been clarified that companies can now apply for ERC even if they had a PPP loan, as long as the qualifying wages for the ERC are not paid for with forgiven PPP loan proceeds. So again, this is retroactive back to March. definitely worth companies going back and taking another look, even if you decided at the time not to pursue this. So the next takeaway from the CAA is regards to the Paycheck Protection Program. And the CAA clarifies that the forgiven loan amounts will not be taxed. And in addition to that, borrowers will be able to deduct otherwise allowable expenses. So this is a rare phenomenon where you're getting money that's not taxed. And then as you spend that money, you also get a deduction, a double dip of benefits. So that's something that we received clarity on. And the PPP itself was also expanded until March 31, 2021. And now it permits a potential second draw for some eligible companies, which is huge because as we are seeing now, when you think about restaurants and so many other retail businesses, they're still struggling. And especially with the shutdown the last few months, outdoor dining closing down. And this is something that could be pretty critical for those businesses barely hanging on. And the other items just from the CAA include extension of paid sick leave, paid family leave, which have been expanded into March 31st, and generation of a few new loan programs and government grants for businesses, and grants specifically for industries that were really impacted, healthcare providers, venue operators, and many other industries impacted by COVID-19. Finally, given that tax reform itself was only a couple of years ago, in the past year, we've seen a record amount of technical corrections and clarifications and final regulations being released by the Treasury Department. And many, many businesses, especially when you think about Southern California and middle market industry, many businesses have relied on historical positions taken years ago, but the regulations recently passed provide a lot of new information, a lot of change, and it's like the ground underneath us is changing. And so it potentially outdates a lot of tax positions that companies are currently taking, and even in some cases create exposure for some companies. So one thing we've been doing at KPMG is assisting our clients by revisiting all significant tax positions, taking a fresh look to determine how the recent regulations can impact their business and how we can set them up for more success.
Jack, thanks for providing some real tangible things that our readers and the business community can take a look at to take advantage of. So we've got time for just a couple more questions here. Kandee, I'd like to ask you to sort of expand upon what Jack just said, but from a different perspective. So along the same lines, are there initiatives that impact nonprofits that you'd recommend our readers to take a look at? And really that could be from the perspective of being a nonprofit or from a perspective of a business leader who wants to support a nonprofit this next year.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that question. So it is important that businesses and also many of your clients that you're working with, help them to find community-based organizations. So there's large nonprofits, there's mid-sized, there's small, and it's the grassroots. And it's the grassroots, small and mid-sized organizations that are really making a difference in the community because we are what's called the trusted. We live, work, and worship in our community. We know our community better than anyone. The people see us and they trust us. So I would suggest that all of the corporations, the funders, the investors, that you start looking for organizations like Positive Results and other smaller nonprofits and invest in them. Help us to grow to be a larger organization, because what we do is we hire people right in the community that have the lived experience. And when you hire someone with lived experience, not only are you getting a trusted person, but they understand the concerns of the community and they provide some of the best services and programs, and they're reliable. So that's one thing. Get invested by joining the board. Joining a board of a nonprofit. Many people think, oh, I want to be involved in this nonprofit that makes $10 million, that has $10 million a year. But it takes a smaller organization who's really working in the community, that has their pulse on the community, to really help you to see the beauty and the value of the people. Many times people drive by and they say, oh, that looks really bad. But it's not the people, it is the lack of the resources. So bring those resources to us and watch how we work. Watch the way we invest the money in the community and how the community thrives. So look for a smaller nonprofit. Send your funding to a nonprofit, set up shared so that if your employees are investing $100, do a match and invest $100 as well. And it's okay to send us money, but we also want to see you. We want to know that you care enough to care about us and come here. And it is good to start another nonprofit if you are a large organization that will start that nonprofit and take funds that you're earning, your investments, and your profit, and then look at how you can partner with another community-based or smaller nonprofit and invest your money. And if you're investing your money, especially, don't get mad, world. Don't get mad when I say this. But if you're investing your money with a large organization, look to see what that money is going to and where it's going. Is it being beneficial to that community? So it is important that we invest in people and community and not just a building or not just a name, because that name has been around forever.
Thank you so much, Kandee. Before I get to our final question for the group here, I want to build off something you said. You know, you're talking about nonprofits and how important it is to be supporting the nonprofit community of all sizes. It's not just the $10 million programs, it's the $300,000 programs that need assistance as well. And I want to put out there, the Business Journal is going to be hosting our nonprofit and corporate citizenship awards this April. We are currently open for nominations. We are looking for the community to tell us about the nonprofits that need visibility most. They're the nonprofits that are making an impact, that need help. And the corporate leaders, tell us about the leaders in the community who are supporting them and who are giving back. So go to our website. It's labusinessjournal.com. It's on our events page. Tell us about the nonprofits in your communities that need the most help, the most visibility, and the people that are recognizing that and doing the most help. So please go there.
Josh, can I also add in the organizations that are at $100,000? You would be surprised at what $100,000 is doing in the community with organizations. I'm going to say this, that I would really love to see people make an investment in a smaller or mid-sized organization, because the work that they're doing with $100,000 and sometimes is just as much as those that have $500,000 or $1 million. Many times people have come to us and said, well, we've got $5,000. Can you train 100 people? And they've given us another organization $500,000 and asked them to train the same group of people. And the outcomes have been much better with a smaller group, because we know the community, we know the people, and relatable.
Thank you, Kandee. Well noted and well said. All right, so I'm going to throw you guys for a little bit of a loop. This last question's a little bit different, but I'm going to ask each of you to respond to it. It's really more either from a personal or a professional standpoint. What's the one thing that you want to impact the most in 2021? And let's start with Jack.
Well, Josh, COVID-19 has been called a great disruptor, but it's also accelerated many trends that were already underway from a technological perspective. So I think our clients will continue to see further disruption from the changing landscape. So the one thing I want to impact most is assisting them in navigating through these changes by using technology and just planning initiatives to take advantage and be ahead of the curve and avoid being disrupted. And we're seeing our everyday lives continue to change as consumers demand that companies are able to sell remotely, right, and deliver products. So in some cases, we're not seeing physical presence even be required. So companies need help in balancing tax efficiencies as they change their business to adapt to consumer demands, and using data analytics to make better decisions for the business. So now more than ever, we're seeing our clients just ask for help from an automating perspective, right? So we're helping them automate and making their lives easier, especially with the remote aspect of it, with all the new legislation. And we've been doing a lot of this for our clients by helping to replace monotonous tasks, like by using some tools that we created, Business Tax Engine, Reform Analyzer and whatnot. So this is really able to provide a lot of automation and really save time for executives by focusing on value-add initiatives and making sure that from a tax perspective, they have a strategic seat at the table and assisting them in making all the right decisions for the business.
Thank you so much, Jack. Kandee, what are your thoughts on that? What do you want to see most impacted in 2021?
I need two things. I like to see Black women leaders have a seat at the table so that we can help formulate the rules, the regulations, the laws, the policies, and even the funding. And then I'd also like to see an investment in community, because it is the people that need the help the most. We need to help, especially education-wise. Then we're also looking at homeless and security and wealth inequities. So let's invest in the people, and also let's invest in Black women leaders. Trust us to help you to make great decisions to impact and improve and rebuild the community.
Thank you so much, Kandee. All right, Deepika, it's your turn to wrap things up. What is the one thing you want to see impacted the most in 2021?
You know, I am really, the thing that I want to see most impacted in 2021 is I am so impressed by the various corporations out there that are putting their face and their money towards social justice causes and not being afraid to do so anymore, and being vocal about it and being vocal about who they do business with. I think this is an important trend and one that I personally am very much behind and very supportive of. I also think the second one, which I'll make slightly more personal, is that in 2021, I think continuing to focus on what matters to us as individuals and us as a community is of critical importance. 2020 showed us when things are stripped away, what's left? What are you left with? What is your own calling? What is your own truth? What is the things that get you motivated and up and focused each and every day, and what stuff no longer matters? So for me, continuing to focus in on that and continuing to help other women identify that for themselves is a personal passion project for me, and that's something that I hope to continue to focus in on in 2021.
Wonderful, wonderful, and well said. So, you know, as we look forward at the Business Journal to events and things that we're hosting, you know, I also want to share next week is the beginning of Black History Month. And one thing that we've done this year to really expand our coverage, we've created a new series called Black Entrepreneurship Month. And each week for the next month, we're going to have a package of stories on business leaders and businesses that are thriving that perhaps we have not covered as much in the past and we've not known about. So we're looking forward to our new editorial special reports that start on Monday. I want to take a moment to thank all of our amazing panelists that are here today. Jack, Deepika, Kandee from our panel right now. From our first panel, thank you to Jim, Elise, Laurie, Elle, and Dean Yortsos. We value your partnership and respect all of your knowledge. I want to remind everyone that we'll be posting the results of today's live poll questions. So if that's something that you're interested in comparing how you feel and your thoughts to the general business community, visit our website. Additionally, we've recorded today's forecast in its entirety. We'll be making it available online as well. I want to thank you all for continuing to read the Business Journal and for tuning in this afternoon. We look forward to hosting you again soon. Until then, please stay safe and have a good afternoon. Thank you.